Okay, so morning everyone and good morning and welcome to Council meeting of Monday 18th of March 2024. Can't believe we're almost at the end of the third month of the year. Just a reminder in terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, we make our way out the nearest exit, which is probably the one at the back, and we assemble across the road from this building and await further instructions. Everyone needs to be aware, and members of the public that have come to address us this morning, the meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube, and probably the microphones pick up what you're saying, so just be careful. I'm sure it's all nice, but and a reminder to turn phones on either off or onto silent. Shad, can I ask you to open with a karakia, please?
Kia ora, Anne. Tātou katoa, kua huitahi nei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. I just want to acknowledge Anne for leading our meeting this morning and to our members of the public gathered here. Nō reira, kia nui tātou. E te atua nei rā mātou huitahi nei tēnei ata ka tukuranga whakamumis ngā whakawhetai ki a koe. Nō reira, toro mai rā toringa kaha ki runga i a mātou, hei āwhina nei, hei tohu nei i a mātou roto i nei mahi. Nō reira, te atua tēnei mātou ina tēnei ki a koe. Korore ki te ronga tapu. Āmeni.
Thank you. So no apologies today. Now we've got some speakers in the public forum. I understand Simon Clark from Colliers is on his way. So do we want to get Zariba Holdings and Classic? Do you want to come up first and talk to us while Simon's on his way? Yep, just come up to the table and make sure that little button is turned on to green. Welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners, Council staff. So my name is Aaron Collier. I'm a consultant planner, and to my right is Dwayne Roper. Dwayne is a director of Zariba Holdings. Apologies from Peter Cooney, who wanted to be here. He also wanted to present to you this morning, but unfortunately he's out of town. So I have a reasonable knowledge and a reasonable amount of experience in the CBD. I've been involved in the Craig's building, the Trustpower building, the JW Hotel and Office site, and the Watson Hughes car parking building. So I'm reasonably familiar with what is going on currently around the CBD and in the city core. And I've also been, as a planner, significantly involved in a number of the city plan review processes over many years. So Zariba and JWL jointly, Zariba and Classic rather, jointly own a building sites at 134 and 142 Durham Street. And they have a significant redevelopment proposed for that site. And I've got just a visual that I'm happy to hand up to you in table, which just shows the proposed redevelopment. Both of the parties have also got significant interests in and around the CBD. So, for example, Zariba Holdings did the adjacent Trustpower development, and Classic involved in the Craig's building. So these are long-term developers who have a strong interest in what goes on. So there's some major redevelopment proposed for the site, and one of the key considerations for any redevelopment in the CBD now is making sure that we have good active frontages and interactions with public space. So Zariba and Classic kind of heard about what was happening with the super stop third hand, and they were the ones that initiated consultation with council staff, which was a little bit disappointing. We ended up with a street meeting, and we've had some subsequent consultation and engagement. They remain opposed to the idea of a super stop. We think there's a whole lot of sort of social, economic, urban design and traffic considerations that haven't been considered. So we've asked repeatedly for copies of technical assessments so that we can get our urban designers to have a look and our transport people to have a look, and we're still effectively waiting. So despite those requests, there's been very limited kind of information that's been provided. And we weren't included in the initial stakeholder consultation. There are a whole lot of other groups that were, but the actual landowners, and I think they were excluded, which was a bit disappointing. We've reviewed the staff report and the assessment, and we think that there's really two good solutions that are open to you. The first solution is you leave it where it is, effectively in the existing location, which is option 2. And the second option is option 1A, but you actually pepper pot the stops and you make them smaller stops, and in a similar manner to what you've done outside the civic core and that part of the CBD. And we think that'll provide not only for your connectivity and your linkages, but it will reduce the concerns that we have around some of the social issues, the effects on a large super stop, for example, outside an active frontage that's been planned on a new building and what have you. And it also provides some more benefits around, for example, putting a stop outside the university and the car parking building to provide for those kind of links east-west. There really isn't much of a link adjacent to where the Zareba and Classic site is. I think there's a small alleyway that kind of goes down through there, but I'm not even sure that council actually have ownership over that. Certainly there's a service lane at the back through Grey Street, but there's no actual link shown on the planning map. So we think, you know, we're certainly supportive of having stops for obvious reasons, but there needs to be a bit more thought and a bit more planning involved. And we also think that council should be providing the conceptual designs and running those past the council's own urban design panel, because that urban design panel was set up for a reason and it should be used. So thank you. We're happy to answer any questions.
Very much. I have to say it is disappointing to hear that the early consultation or early informative discussions weren't started with the landowners, because I can tell you, I feel like I've been discussing downtown car parks for 3 years that I've been here, to not much great effect, I'd have to say. So I guess my first question is that these are 2 sites, is that right?
Yes.
Yep. How long have they been owned? Dwayne, how long have you owned those?
We've owned one of them for about 15 years and the other one for five years.
Okay. Yeah. So you were there when Durham Street, previous council dug it up, and it ended up costing the ratepayers $10.5 million, cost quite a few businesses a lot of money. So you were aware then that the road was being strengthened to take buses?
No, we weren't aware that there was going to be bus stops, you know.
What did you think all that strengthening in the road was for?
We weren't aware that it was being strengthened. We just thought it was part of the upgrade.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was only discussed at the on-street meeting that we called. The staff said, well, we actually put a whole lot of strengthening within the road corridor, but we weren't aware of it.
It seems strange to me that it was almost 24 months of work with we've gone back and looked at all the publicity around it, that it was unknown that that road was being strengthened and could therefore take buses. I find that difficult. However, I have to believe you if you say you didn't know. So were you involved in any of the concerns that were raised at the time about the costs and the length of time it took? And I understand it was a pretty painful sort of process.
It was a 12-month sort of process. I don't think it was 24 months. But we had issues with our sites. We didn't have a sewage connection after the works were completed. It was a pain in the neck, to be honest, but we were unaware of any bus stops super stops being planned for the end of the street. So.
Yeah, so look, I don't understand the term super stop. What I understand we're talking about is 90 metres of bus stops on one side and 90 metres on the other, so that 3 buses at any one time can get in and out. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and taking away 18 car parks.
Yeah, that's right. So the ratepayers have spent $10.5 million doing that street up. You can understand our concern at now coming and digging that back up. So if we went with the option that the developers have proposed, would the developers then, the landowners, be willing to contribute to some of the costs of that? Well,
we didn't propose that option 1A. We said they should be spread out along the whole of Durham Street.
So. But if they're spread out in Durham Street, some of those gardens will have to be dug up and relayed as bus stops. Are you then prepared to contribute to the cost of that?
Or should we? We'll be contributing through development contributions anyway. Developing buildings. Yeah.
Okay, so that was my questions.
Sorry, I did query where those numbers had come from, and
What
When I-
numbers?
The numbers that are in the report around the upgrade costs, I think it's $3.5 million, and that seems like an awfully high figure to remove a few gardens and replace some concrete. So the staff said that they were kind of a very loose and high-end kind of estimate. So it'd be good to get maybe some more information around
Oh,
those
I agree.
costs.
I agree. And we certainly are asking.
Seems like a
for-
big number.
Yeah, it
just
does.
to remove
Well,
some
actually,
plants and-
the number in the later report is 15 million being spent on bus stops around the centre city. So we are questioning that. But just the same, 10.5 has already been spent putting it the way it is. If we're going to change it, that's ratepayers' money that has been expended.
From what I understand from talking to staff, a lot of that was in maybe steel and stuff under the carriageways itself.
That's right.
So
The road strengthening.
the road strengthening. So whether that, when you can fit in smaller bus locations within that or not, I don't know, but it seems like an awfully large number to do some adjustments to some concrete and some landscaping.
Any other questions for the team? I know, Simon, we just took Sareba first while you were coming, so you will get your opportunity.
No, that's all good.
I just wonder if we are all talking the same language about what these bus stops might look like. Because, when you talk a super stop, certainly my initial impression was that we were going to have something similar to what's up in Durham Street North at the moment with the verandas and everything that goes with it. But I understand from the staff that some of the imagery they're showing actually doesn't include a traditional bus facility like that, but rather one that is more designed like the Auckland scenario, where there are shop verandas with effectively line markings on the road, but you wouldn't otherwise, apart from some seating, you wouldn't otherwise really know that it was a bus stop. So I just wonder if there is a design solution that actually might be possible, that can create something that is in keeping with your development, but also, certainly from the council's point of view, the fact that we've already reinforced the road, and there would be additional cost further up. I think certainly our preliminary position would be that the current site is preferable. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of compromise solution in there that could work for both parties.
Well, we've seen very little in terms of design. That's our main issue, is that there's just this complete vacuum of design in terms of conceptual plans and drawings and what have you. Now, if we were proceeding with applying for resource consent for that building, we'd be required to provide all of that conceptual design up front. And I'd expect the commissioners to have that now as part of their decision-making process.
Can I just speak just for a second to it? No, okay, you carry on.
So I take it from that if there was a commitment by the council to work with you on developing potential designs, you would be open to that possibility.
We're always happy to work collaboratively with the council, but there are a couple of other aspects that are missing as well, and that's not just the urban design. It's about what are the social impacts, what are the impacts on the natures of the activities that are going to occur adjacent to. For example, I know there's been discussions around the Hamilton and Harrington Street stops and how they're going to interact, for example, with the future hotel site there. So there's a little bit more to it, but that engagement would seriously be welcomed. The idea of having everything kind of located within that 90 metres is still a concern, and whether they can be broken up would still be the preference.
I just wanted to tease out, Aaron, you made the comment about the pepper potting. Do I take it from that comment, though, that in terms of a recognition that there could be, for example, a bus stop outside the property, but there would be a number then spread along Durham? So still recognition that the opportunity in that location for a bus stop or whatever.
Absolutely, and there's one actually already completely adjacent to, and that's fine. That's actually, that sort of concept and design is welcomed.
All right, look, thank you very much. Simon, we'll come to you.
Thank you. That's great. Don't normally need a microphone with my voice.
You just need
it's
to
all
be
good.
aware, we are actually recording this.
Okay.
So that's why you need a microphone so that people that are watching can hear.
Okay, no, that's great. So I'm the shareholder with Foster's Construction in 159 to 153 Durham Street. So that's where the current bus station is across the road. Okay. We're planning at the moment, we're in advanced stages, a 5-story office building on the site. We've done our geotech investigations and we're in costing and prelim leasing stage at the moment. So the property is 5 levels of offices with a ground floor retail, central foyer, and then a shared amenity for all of the office tenants on the ground floor. Again, I feel like we haven't really been properly consulted with this and over a very short period of time. There seems to be a rush to get everything done, and I can understand wanting to make decisions, but I don't think we've been properly consulted with and had the time to come back and give our exact feedback. The current plan for the compressed bus stops at the southern end of Durham Street gives no regard to the streetscape. Now, we talked before about, an integrated design and look from there. So I have no problem, and we have no problem with bus stops on Durham Street. But when you compress it so much, like we've got to think about integrating our foyers, our car park entries, our retail frontages, maybe our areas which aren't going to be so much retail, like a half of our ground floor is going to be more office or public amenity or for the tenants on the ground floor. So, but when you compress it and put 3 on each side within a very short vicinity, you can't integrate that design, okay? And then you are going to have those clashes where, when you're coming into a building, you're going to have a bus stop directly in front of the door and all those sort of things. So I think we have to look at an expanded area on Durham Street. I know that comes at a cost, okay? But, currently we're building a $25 million building in Durham Street and want to get it off the ground. There may be some public money to do that. I think another thing that you've got to understand is that this part of Durham Street is very unique in the CBD because it has good geotech, okay? And that what you're doing is you're putting bus lanes in front of some of the best and easiest developable office building in the CBD. You can just look down here at, the Craig's building, which is having endless dewatering. Okay, they went into the ground, which most probably wasn't a smart thing to do. But the geotech problems, they can't get enough height out of it to make it viable now, because of the geotech issues. So you've got this medium rise area that is prime for the picking. You've got some older style buildings, which are most probably ready for redevelopment. And then you're putting the stumbling block in front of it. Places like Grace Street and are lower lying, okay, the geotech issues. Parts of Devonport Road like this are good, but there isn't actually many other places around that we can build good office buildings. So so we've got to get that integration correct with the streetscape to really make it work. If we look at condensing these bus stops, I don't think our development will be viable because our tenants will be concerned about the safety of having all of those people directly in front of their building. No matter what the regional council says and the council say, there is still serious concerns with safety. No one's got this right, but I think the best solution is actually broadening it over a wider area to actually dissipate the congregation Okay, if you have more stops and broader apart, then I think it'll dissipate that, and that's what we're looking for.
Okay, look, thank you very much. I spent a bit of time in Wellington where they seem to manage this okay. Lots of people congregate on the footpaths. Actually, I think some of the retailers think that it's quite good because they want to have a car park. But anyway, look, I understand, and I certainly understand. I think we understand that this is geotechnically, this is a really good part of town to build in, and they're rare and almost unique. From our perspective, I think it would be fair to say that we struggle with the practicality of these huge, big yellow buses, which are largely empty, driving round and round what is a very small CBD. And we're struggling to find, as you can see by what's proposed in Hamilton and Harrington, we're struggling to find room for what the regional council says it's going to need. So we temporarily went to Durham Street North whilst we struggled to find somewhere that was more suitable. I still personally I'm not convinced that Durham Street North isn't suitable, but I'm not a traffic engineer, and so we're working, trying to work our way through all of that. But I think what we would like to do is to have the staff work with you to see whether there's any way that we can share design concepts. I think it's quite a good idea to run it past urban design team and try and find a sensible solution. I think there's a bit of perception. There were some in Willow Street, when we first came, there were some very serious social issues, but the environment helped that because there were nooks and crannies and places, and it was a good place to hang out. It's not so great up on Durham Street, and I understand that the incidences have been rare. I walk past it every month, and I go down to Bay Court to do citizenship ceremonies, and there are just ordinary people sitting in those seats who use public transport coming in and to and from town. Half our staff have B cards and use public transport. So I think there is a bad perception. I understand that and the nervousness around it, but it will change over time. We are a big city and we have to use more public transport. So look, we've got the item, we've heard from you, thank you very much. As I say, we share your disappointment that you weren't involved earlier and that we haven't been able to share your designs and our designs and try and come to some agreement on what it might look like. But we are also very conscious that this was a lot of money that was spent by the ratepayers. And so all the way through, we have been very clear with our staff, and I don't know how many times I've said it to regional council staff, we are not going to go and dig up roading that the council has put down and streetscaping that the council has put down in the last 5 years. So we hear you. Thank you very much. Sorry that you've had to come in and talk to us, but I think we'll try and find a way through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No late items. I don't think I've been told no late items. No confidential business to be transferred into open. No change to the order of business unless, have we got those slides for that item so that we can see? We have got slides. So that brings us to the minutes of the 26th of February. Any clarifications, questions, alterations? Bill's happy to move. It's a true and correct record. Stephen second. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Declarations of conflicts of interest? None. No deputations, presentations or petitions. That brings us to 10.1, recommendations from other committees, and we have a recommendation from the Wastewater Management Review Committee. Who is speaking to that? Anyone? Christine? No?
Don't think we need to speak to it. It's
Oh, Bill will speak to it. Yep. A lot of work's gone into this.
Perhaps, and I just wanted on that very point. And we did have to pause towards the end of last year to allow some time for the parties to work through and to where we have landed. This was considered at the last meeting of the Wastewater Management Review Committee, and there was agreement around that table from both parties in terms of where the recommendations have landed. There's still quite a bit of work to do in this space, which no doubt Nick and co will attest to. But certainly I think we're in a good space now in terms of moving that work forward.
Okay. Shared second. Yep.
I think just in terms of the process and engaging with mana whenua through the Wastewater Review Committee, I think from a commission perspective, wanting to make sure that we kind of got this right. So it did take a little bit more time to work the issues through, but it actually sets the platform, I think, in terms of the program business case over the next 30 years about how we plan and provide wastewater services throughout the city, integrating through into what might be what will be a change through Three Waters. So it sets those objectives, it sets some clarity for an incoming council and potentially a new entity to manage and develop our wastewater services over the long term.
And in a way that respects the values of mana whenua, but also it's a very pragmatic document. I congratulate the team that's worked the way through because, as you say, Shad, it sets a very good platform now for some quite big changes, big structural changes that are ahead of us. Okay, so moved by Bill, seconded by Shad. Any other questions? No one here to answer them, other than the two committee members. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Strategy, finance and risk recommendation on Keenan Road, loan funded, unbudgeted operating expenditure for Keenan Road and the Wairoa Bridge Cycleway Safety Works. Anything? Bill and Stephen, second. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Okay. City Centre public transport. So I did ask if we could have a better document plan so that we can see what we're talking about. I found it very difficult when those guys were presenting that I didn't have a plan that showed me where they were talking about. Put it up for us.
Sorry,
I did see one earlier on, pre-agenda, but it didn't make its way into the agenda.
No, I don't know why.
It was in the PDF version. For some reason, it didn't work in the HTML version.
Yeah, we had it for the agenda briefing and the material was there, but it didn't make its way into the...
Doesn't help.
Sorry, just connecting up to show the map, but maybe we start off with the initial intro.
Morning, Commissioners, Exec. So this report follows on from the presentation from Simon, Aaron and Dwayne's comments earlier and their feedback received last week in the workshop with them. Sean will go through the remainder of the PT stops in the city centre in greater detail. That's Willow Street, Hamilton, Harrington and Dive. So I'll just make a few general opening points as it pertains to all the stops inclusive of Durham or specific to Durham itself, which very much aligns with the advice from the gentleman earlier. So all of the options, as you know, as we've gone through the business case process with the NZTA and then some council project process as it relates to city centre, PT, infrastructure, and finding a workable compromise with regional council, which also accommodates, promotes and encourages the essential development and investment in our city centre. They've all required significant degrees of compromise. And as we're finding more information, like from the previous gentleman last week, our recommendation is that we do adapt so that the best compromise decision can be found for the greatest good and for the longest term for the betterment of the city as a whole. So we're quite willing to look at those other options for Durham Street and certainly concur that that's a good idea. The current interim location, commonly known as Durham Street North, does not allow the future growth of the PT network as previously agreed between TCC and Regional Council. And I think is unanimously seen as not being a suitable location. Durham Street South, in comparison, has significant development opportunities, as Simon, Aaron and Dwayne mentioned earlier. Alternative option that they mentioned and that we've described in further detail in this report has the potential to minimise the impact on vital city centre development and investment for the future of Tauranga, and we think is certainly worth further consideration and investigation with those parties.
Just before you go on, Tom, so a couple of things in that. So the process of developing the business case with NZTA, because it almost seems that happens in complete isolation with the transport experts sitting around talking about, as we've seen over the last couple of years, where's the best place and looking at all the options. That seems to happen in isolation from the actual landowners and users on the street. Is that the way that the system denotes it, or is that just the way that we do things?
It's certainly not perfect. The way that the business case methodology is set up and that we're required to be compliant with lends itself to identifying technical solutions earlier in the process. And often we describe this 3 lenses. If you get a technical solution, it might be great from an engineering or a planning or a data modelling perspective, but that might mean completely different outcomes to the community, or it may not be feasible at a political or a board layer with council or with the NZTA or the minister in some cases, depending on the size and scale. So throughout the process, there is a bit of an awkward juggling act. It's like spinning plates to try and find the ultimate compromise somewhere in the middle of those 3 considerations that achieves the appropriate degree of compromise for the greater good for the longer term.
So this is part of the bigger discussion that we've been having with Waka Kotahi about those 5 big projects. Really, it's the same issue, isn't it? So the process doesn't necessarily allow us to take due consideration of the effect on the community. Yeah. So, but this is on a smaller scale. We put those 5 big projects with an oversight group and hopefully working together with NZTA on the big road transport projects. But this is mirrored in just trying to design our centre city with the best technical solution versus the best community decision. So the second thing is, my second question then is Durham Street North. Everyone says it's not suitable. And I understood that it wasn't suitable because it's not long enough for the 90 metres that they need for the 3 bus stops. But is it suitable to have some of the bus stops there? So could we spread some of the bus stops between Durham Street North and Durham Street South, given and I understand, despite what I've seen along Lambton Quay, I do understand the concern about 90 metres of bus stops and then development trying to deal with ins and outs to their particular part and how that all works, and a mass of people standing there. Could we spread them across the two North and South Durham Street?
We could. I'll let Sean talk the engineering detail to that.
Yeah, so absolutely, with you in the fact that we do have relatively narrow road corridors as well, so it would feel a little bit more condensed, probably even than Lambton Quay.
Because there's a big wide footpath there.
Correct. So the issue with splitting between Durham Street South and Durham Street North in the long term is that it is too far from an interchanging perspective. So the issue is, while the majority of passengers come into the city centre, a number of them still do change between services in the city centre, being that that's where all the services end up. So it's just around the distance of having to travel from one bus to another bus, and that length ends up getting too far between Durham Street North and Durham Street South. In particular, you've got intersections and the like where the weather, you're more prone to weather and the like.
But I thought you were going to put up the diagram showing the properties and the suggestion from the landowners about spacing those those bus stops along Durham Street South, because one of them would be on the corner of Spring Street and Durham, so you'd just be crossing the road to another bus stop. That's not a great distance to walk to change buses.
Yeah, that is the. Sorry, that's the next slide. I was having technical issues. I appreciate that. It does feel further though, because you do have to cross a road. You'd have canopy the entire way, the entire length for that changing. However, you'd then need to cross a road.
That's what we're looking
It's that perceived separation as much as anything, and that's only the one stop. So rather than moving three of them down there.
So then, and I'm going to ask you this about Dive Crescent as well. And you know what I'm going to ask, because I've been asking it for 2 years. Is this what we need now, or is this what we need when the new super duper through service comes, which is still 2 years away from stage one, probably longer now that the government's cut a lot of the funding? So are we trying to shoehorn something in here that's not going to be used for the next 5 or 6 years? And if the answer is yes, why are we doing that?
So the answer in general is yes. It's about still making public transport more attractive now, because at the current time, the temporary facilities really showing its age of only initially wanting to be in place for 18 months. So it is starting to look a little bit tired. The answer is yes, on the proviso that the conversation that we're currently having is because the future location wasn't planned at the time. Because if the future location had been discussed in this amount of detail when we were doing Durham Street upgrade, for example, maybe we would have landed on something along these lines. So it's about making sure that we are able to provide certainty to everybody that at the very least, we've got the locations agreed. Everybody knows we can develop around them, rather than get into the situation where we've got additional developments online, there's additional build, there's additional streetscape happening, and then in 3 years' time we are trying to shoehorn something into a location that just doesn't work.
Yeah, well, I still think we're years away from that. Because I think we're 2 years away from stage one, which is not going to help us very much. Okay, so those are my questions. And Dive Crescent is the same. Could we get away with acknowledging that Dive Crescent, that's where those car parks will be, but in the meantime, we're only doing one each side, because that's all we need, which we've done.
Correct, and in the recommendation, I think I've left a time frame completely off Dive Crescent.
Yeah, that's what
being
worried
that.
me, because
Yeah.
it sounds like we're going to do them now.
No, sorry, I left it off based on the proviso that it wouldn't be done until it was found that it was needed, and we're
I think we'll
unsure
add
on
that
that
into the
date.
recommendation. Okay, so that's my questions. Who wants to go next? And really, in fairness, we should have the regional council sitting here, because their technical people are the ones that are pushing this. I know you guys have been really trying to find a way through this, but it's the regional council who are our partners in this, who have the service. And for some reason, we have to provide the infrastructure. I understand that was a deal that was done a long time ago. And we've had countless discussions at the joint PT committee about the effect on our city, because we're not designing a city around bus stops. But, you know, we've heard this is a great place geotechnically in the city, and we don't want to stop development of what looks to be fantastic stuff for some big empty yellow buses. I'll keep quiet.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to explore a little bit more the pepper potted version that we have up on the screen. So has there been any conversations with the university and the owners of 122 and 116 about the impact of that on them?
There hasn't been, so I really want to be clear that this came up after a discussion with some stakeholders on Monday. We haven't had a opportunity to discuss it. That's also why the cost element is quite loose at the moment, being that had to provide enough for architectural, and knowing that where Durham Street originally cost about 10 million plus price inflation. This would be if we were to go for this option, that would be the next step, which would be stakeholders across the wider working out where works, where doesn't. So there has been some thought of that at the moment. So for example, in front of Mercury Energy and the university made sure that in this little graphic we moved it as far away from their open frontages as possible.
I make that point because the lack of consultation has kind of got us to where we are now. I'd hate to see that repeated. So I think it's critical that all parties are involved in ongoing discussions. The road service in those alternative locations, I presume, has not been reinforced.
So the road across the entire length is reinforced. It's the fact that we, down in the southern location, it's the bays themselves are reinforced, whereas we don't have bays currently in this more spread out version. So it would be installing new concrete bays where the planting and stormwater treatment is.
And that presumably drives the additional cost.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. And the existing Durham Street North location would also need reinforcing if that were to be an interim solution, correct?
Correct. So the pavement is very much failing. I don't know if you've walked down there lately, but it's sunk quite significantly. And then look, there would be a desire, if we were going to use that for a much longer interim location, to have shelters that are more reminiscent of a city centre shelter rather than a suburban shelter.
And then finally, the volume and extent of transfers, I think, is an important understanding. So part of the rationale for combining the stops is to make it easy to hop off one bus and onto another. But if that's only a relatively small number of transfers relative to total trips, then the need for that may have been overstated question. So I think we need to understand the incidence of that and actually how far is reasonable for people to move from one bus stop to another, particularly those that are disadvantaged in terms of their travel mobility.
Yeah, no, completely accept that. And I think at the moment, the bus service is majorly used by those travelling into the city centre. There is a desire to allow for people to travel more widely across the city by a future public transport network. So, yeah, that demand is desired to increase over time.
So this transfer stuff isn't supported currently by any evidence, because at the moment most of the bus routes finish in the CBD. So the transfer between the two of them isn't a feature.
I don't have the numbers on it. As I understand, it does happen, just not at high levels.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so it's not supported by good evidence. So I come back to my question: what do we need now? And could we? I understand you want to provide for the future and give certainty, but nothing in this life is certain. And the city is changing quite so rapidly that I don't think anyone can be certain about what it's going to be like, who's going to develop where over the next 5 years. So what do we need now? And could we designate Durham Street North for future development if and when that through system develops and there is a need proven for that, what do you call it, interchange?
So what we absolutely need now is a alternative in ideally the Durham Street South location for all the Grey Street stops, so that we get buses off Grey Street, off Willow Street, and they're all travelling along Durham Street. So that's, and that I would sort of say from a transport, city centre transport perspective, that's a fairly bottom line. The next element is, at the very least, if we were to keep Durham Street North in operation, a significant upgrade to Durham Street North, with the idea that we can work through with regional council on that future.
But in Durham Street South, what would you need now?
We would need the current two stops. Ideally, we would split them so that they were two individual stops, and one to two stops on the south side that doesn't exist currently.
Bill.
Thanks, Chair. It's really a question around process. If, for example, today we dealt with the bus stops, etc., around Willow, Harrington, Hamilton and Dive Crescent, but then deferred, because I've got a draft recommendation, deferred consideration of the Durham Street and Elizabeth, pending engagement with property owners, developers around the location and design, etc., of the stops in Durham and Elizabeth. Is that practical and possible? Because it's about starting to give some certainty to those stops and what's happening in the northern part of the city centre, but coming back and doing some further work and engagement and discussion and design around Durham Street and Elizabeth Street.
Certainly possible, and I think also practical and pragmatic, because it gives us that sense of certainty and decision to move on in relation to Willow, Hamilton, Harrington and Dive for the future, and allows us the opportunity to explore the most optimal solution for Durham Street in the near-term future that recognises the significant development opportunities that we're now aware of.
I think that's very sensible, Bill, except I think we should be looking at the whole of Durham Street.
I intended, yes,
Yeah,
yep, absolutely.
I didn't make a note of it, but You got it written down?
I can give
Oh,
it to
excellent,
Janie and she
excellent.
can, and then we can hash
Carry
it.
on talking.
Yes.
Yep. Shad.
So I was just going to follow on from that. I think, given our engagement today, I think, in terms of further work and further investigation for Durham Street, for the whole of Durham Street, it would be useful to actually have somebody from the Regional Council and Waka Kotahi involved in those conversations, just so that they're aware of the challenges or the issues that we're grappling with and trying to get that alignment. Otherwise, we'll end up landing on a solution and then potentially not necessarily agreed to by Regional Council or by Waka Kotahi. It would be useful for them to be in the room when you have the conversations, either with property owners, with property owners in particular, along Durham Street.
We certainly have had what was then Waka Kotahi involved throughout the last 2 years, step by step. And I think it's a lesson learned that we need to have Regional Council fully engaged at every single step. It's probably fair to say we took a milestone update approach rather than full integration. But I also acknowledge the very good input from Mike Seaborn, the Director of Public Transport at Regional Council, into the stakeholders meeting we had last Monday with the developers who presented earlier as well. That's something that he's signalled will be occurring more often as well. We certainly appreciate that.
Okay, so Bill, are you proposing that from the recommendations, Council A receives a report, B2, so adopts the city centre bus facility locations of B2, which is the Civic Centre split stops in Willow and Hamilton, C, Dive Crescent with one each way now, but signal that is the future, that's the future super stop. And then we haven't heard anything about the interregional stop in Elizabeth Street. Do you want to include that, or do you want to include that in your motion? Because then we'd come to. So why don't we do that?
Yes.
To start with. So that's city centre. So that's receiving the report and then adopting the B2 and Dive Crescent with proviso that it's one stop currently, but it's designated for the super stop when it's needed.
I'm happy to move
that. Is anyone happy to second that? Okay, so let's put that, if everyone's happy. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And then your proposal is a motion that says that staff engage with property owners, developers and developers, probably tenants.
Yes, yep, happy with that.
Regarding the location and design of bus stops on Durham and Elizabeth Street. So that takes into account the interregional.
That's correct.
And reports back within 6 weeks. This is to include pepper potting and implications of retaining the existing Durham Street North bus stops and what is required now for the next 5 years and then beyond that period.
Probably the word potential. I'm not saying it should be pepper potting, to look at potential.
Potential, include
pepper
potential.
potting.
Yep. Is that?
I would probably just add that the interregional stop on Elizabeth Street could be on Spring Street or such, dependent on the actual agreed location of the main city bus stop. Probably doesn't need to be added into the.
No, but I think if no, we probably don't need to, but it'll be an add-on, whatever you come back with. it will be included in that. Well, we could just have staff engage with property owners, developers regarding the location and design of bus stops on Durham, Elizabeth, Spring Streets.
Yeah, I just wonder if we might also add design, location and cost.
Design, location.
Because A, you want to understand costs anyway, but B, there may well be implications for Waka Kotahi funding or not, depending on what the final.
All right, so Bill's moving that staff engage with property owners and developers regarding the location, design and costs of bus stops on Durham, Elizabeth and Spring Streets and report back within 6 weeks. This is to include potential pepper potting and implications of retaining the existing Durham Street North bus stops and what is required now for the next 5 years and then beyond that period. I think that makes absolute sense. Who knows what the city's going to look like and who knows what public transport's going to look like in 5 years' time. Okay? You happy with that? You'll need to just tidy that up. The grammar on it. No, my grammar that I've added, not your grammar. So you're moving that? Did you say you'd second that? Okay. So that takes care of that. Is there anything else that you need from us in those recommendations? No, that takes care of them all.
Thank you very much.
Put that then. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Let's still go to them with a bill. Okay. Thanks for that. I think that's the best thing we can do. Right, long-term plan, other topics.
Good morning. So this report just brings together all the things that were brought up during the consultation period, which weren't specifically consultation questions, and then provides council's proposed answer to those. So I'll take the report and the attachment as read, and if there are any questions, we are happy to make amendments before they go out. And just one last thing, we will investigate. We're conscious that it's been since November since people put these in, so we're looking to get it out as quickly as possible and hopefully sort of have everything ready to go for the date of adoption.
Look, I raised it when we went through this last time. I'm really concerned because I have no memory. In fact, my memory is very clear that we specifically said we did not want to take the Bay Park Stadium depreciation in until we understood what the liability was, and that is still being worked through. And on page 11, you have an answer to someone that says, in May 2023, council agreed to fund depreciation on Mercury Bay Park Stadium. This means there's funding built into the draft long-term plan to refurbish and replace assets in stages throughout the stadium over the 10-year period. And that really worries me because we don't know what the liability of that stadium is. And I thought we'd left it out when we took BVL's depreciation into the accounts.
We followed this up internally. I've got a reply here from Finance. While the renewals we are funding across the next 10 years includes the stadium, it is only for the main stand and not the north stand specific to Speedway. We have therefore been quite conservative in how we are rating the community in the draft LTP. until revised costings and options have been presented and a decision has been made on the future of the stadium part of the site. So we are depreciating the stand on this side that has the corporate boxes, the offices, where Bay AV is, and all of the facilities that support the wider operation of the site. It is not the Speedway stand part of it.
Well, then we need to make that very clear in the answer. And stop my heart palpitations. Because I reckon the rest of it's pretty rumpty. Okay, that was all I could find. Anything else? No? Yes, we do need a.
And we can use the CEO's delegation to fix that factual
it.
error. So we
Thank
can
you.
use resolution C to deal with that matter.
Okay, so Bill's moved. Oh, no, Stephen moved. Bill second. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Be good to have that ready to go end of April. Still a long time, isn't it? People forget what they said, but you repeat their comments to remind them. No, that's right. Thank you. Okay. Transport projects. Tom's back again. Still smiling, still smiling.
Does help.
With the inclusion of documents, whether it was just the PDF version or. So this is a paper about the risk appetite basically for Tauranga City Council to maintain momentum on some of the projects that we've got underway while we're waiting for the NLTP to be decided on later than usual this year from Waka Kotahi in light of government policy statement shifts. And I've just handed out a couple of schedules. One is color coded with green, orange, and pink. I think that can be called. And the two first ones are projects that we've committed to taking a risk from a funding perspective already. The next two, the orange ones, are the one that we are proposing to maintain momentum on, and the pink ones are the ones that we suggest that, well, actually it's too high a risk. We don't think that Waka Kotahi necessarily will come to the party after the business cases have been developed, and suggest to focus on the two. The second schedule that we've given you is in order to fund those two, given the constraints in the LTP. If we were to decide on a yes for those two, that list of projects that we've given you is where that money would come from. So it's a Peter to Paul issue, basically.
Sorry, just explain the big one, the blue ones. What is that one?
That one is in order to fund the risk component of the ones that we take forward. That's where we would either push them out or revisit contingencies. It's a bit of a mix of how we would go about dealing with those projects, but we would find enough funding within those to maintain momentum on the ones that we're suggesting to move forward.
So what's the difference between the city centre transport hub 15, almost 16 million, and the city centre transportation development of 80 million?
The city centre transport hub is the work we've just discussed previously as it relates to Durham, Willow, Hamilton, Harrington and Dype. The second item is transport works as it relates to city centre development outside of those PT elements.
Can I just also say that it's not, obviously that's an eye-watering number that we've got there. That's what we've got in the LTP at the moment. So that looks after all the investment and Dive Crescent, etc. And we are looking at how we can streamline that. But the columns I think you need to focus on are the columns over to the right under proposed to progress. So that's the risk component. The 15 million isn't the risk component to TCC, but it's the dollar values that we maintain momentum on until we have a business case approved or otherwise.
But didn't we say with Arataki bus facility that we weren't going to spend all that, we were going to spend our share of it without NZTA and get whatever streetscaping we could get for the 4.5 million that we'd budgeted? Haven't we decided that?
Yeah, that is correct. But these are the numbers that are in the system and the TO and LTP, which is our how we communicate with the transport agency. So I guess we couldn't put up a number here that's different to what we have in the formal system, but we have agreed to go ahead with Arataki on the 4 point something that we have in our budget. That's correct.
So why isn't that green? We've committed to the 4 million.
It should be green. Yeah, we have committed to it. But as Nick said, it's still live as a co-funding line between TCC and NZTA.
So how do you get it out? I mean, it sounds ridiculous because we're not going to get the money from the NZTA unless we wait until September. We've decided to go ahead with the 4.6, and that means it comes out of that system and it just goes into our long-term plan, doesn't it?
That's correct. We just take it out. There's no obstacle to us removing our share from that co-funding.
My other question is did you want to make a comment?
I was just saying that so the 4.5 million in the solution that allows us is not viable for that to be sufficient on Farm Street due to a lot of undergrounding of services and things like that. So since that was sort of agreed and we looked into that and all the technical detail around that number has actually risen. So there are alternative sources that we're looking for to achieve what we need in order to get a viable solution for Farm Street.
Well, I think we'd have to be convinced that what you were planning needed the moving of services.
Yes. My understanding from a technical point of view, it does. There's a lot of underground services that go and feed them all, so it's more complicated than you might think. So it'll come to a point where that's clear and there'll be a decision to make again around.
Well, sorry, but I think we made the decision. We've got 4.6 million. You spend that to get some better facilities, but that's all we've got. And we wanted to get on with it.
Yep. As we all did, I think. And I think we can get to the point where if those undergrounding services are essential, then we can get to that point and then seek other ways of getting basically the stuff on top of the streetscaping underway. So
I think you'll have to be convincing us. So the sooner the better, because the decision we made was to spend 4.6 million and get on with whatever that will buy. That's what we spend.
Yep.
So if anything different, you'll need to come back ASAP.
Yeah, got that loud and clear. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So my other question then is about the IFF funding. So where does that sit with the city centre transport hub? So if trying to understand this complex system, so we've got the IFF funding, there's 14 projects going through NZTA processes. Any one of them could be replaced. That was part of the deal. But if the NZTA money falls out, if we're not successful with that, does that mean that we can't use the IFF funding for that project anyway?
we can still use IFF funding regardless of NZTA funding component or not.
So if their funding component is there, we can match it. We can still go ahead with the project with our funding.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Those were my queries. I still would, but you're coming back to us with costs on city centre transport hub and the breakdown on that. So we'll
That's correct.
get a close look at that. Stephen.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit too. So to me, what we are risking is the NZTA contribution. We're committed to fronting with our money anyway. The way the report is written, or the proposed to progress, it says it assumes NZTA co-funding of 51% of total cost. Whereas actually what we're considering is that we're not going to get that funding, and that's what's at risk. So I just wanted to make it clear that that's what we're talking about, because in the case of Arataki, the contribution is only 2.295. As opposed to, well, I'm not quite sure what that is. That's a dollar value that's at risk. That's not 51%.
So it's really that the 31st of August is when Waka Kotahi Correction NZTA would be able to confirm as it stands at the moment at the earliest, because of delayed release in the draft GPS and the consultation that's occurring through until May for that document. The 31st of August is the earliest that the NLTF would be able to be confirmed, and we would then have certainty about what funding we have for the next 3-year tranche of the NLTP. The delay that's incurred by a late release of GPS and us previously operating off an interim GPS post central government election last year, is that the effect is that we have an extended period of ambiguity and uncertainty about exactly what funding will be committed to. We do know that NZTA have confirmed that it will be at 51%, but what we don't know until the NLTF and NLTP are released is exactly which projects in which ranking order settle, how high or low up the batting order they are for Tauranga. And we're confident that the top 5 on this list will be confirmed, but it's our obligation to make it clear that the extended timelines carry a degree of ambiguity and risk as to project costs and continuation between now and the magic date of 31st of August.
So in essence, what is at risk is NZTA funding.
That's correct.
We are reasonably confident insofar as we can, given the circumstances, that funding will be available. So the risk hopefully is relatively low.
That's correct. And we are confident that those projects at the top end of the list, as with many of the transport projects across our infrastructure program, have a high degree of alignment with the current draft GPS released by the national government. As we've discussed through the RLTP process as well, there's some that have really, really clear and obvious alignment, and probably see Tauranga actually settle into a really good position with this GPS as well. But that alignment doesn't mitigate the time gap that we need to bridge, and that's the risk, is the time gap between now and then.
Okay.
And so the 4 million is a comfort that you can continue on with those projects.
That allows us to give you the assurance that we can continue with those priority projects and bridge that gap through to the 31st of August, when we can put it bluntly, we can get back to spending NZTA's money.
I'm surprised that the safe network, because the minister was quite clear when he was here last week that safety is one of the 5 major elements. So I'm surprised that you think that we might not get that money.
Yeah, I think they go about it in a different way now on the GPS though. So this is a bit of a reset of that we're looking at physical interventions versus policing, those sorts of things. So it's not to say that the new GPS won't focus on road safety, but it'll do it a bit differently.
Way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also back to your question, Stephen, about the risk. It depends a little bit on where these projects are during the phases as well, because if we're about to go into physical construction, obviously we have to see that through to completion. Whereas if we're in design or business casing, we can drop that at any time. Whereas if we commit to Domain or Granada, for instance, by the time we have a signed contract and start that physical works, there's sort of no point of return. So there's this different risk elements to this list as well. I hope that makes sense.
Yep. Well, it's disappointing for Area B and Area A, a lot of work's gone into it, but that's the problem with GPS, isn't it?
It's still $250 million allocated to walking and cycling projects. And I think at the moment with Area B, we're at least at the top of the list. We are submitted to Waka Kotahi, so we're sitting there first and best dressed, good to go. I think that just requires that we really have our eyes on the prize to compete for that 100 million that's still there. It's a big number. If we let, my thinking is let's let other councils be dissuaded by the GPS, and if we maintain a somewhat ruthless focus on getting our hands on that investment, we can still progress walking and cycling in active mode and mode shift through the next 3 years. It's not at all to suggest that it goes into dormancy for the next 36 months.
Oh,
To move the recommendations, Chair, and I'd just like to acknowledge and support Tom's comments he's just made.
one of the comments that was made to us quite early on when we arrived from Waka Kotahi was that we weren't ruthless enough in going after our money or their money, and that we tended to go into one pot to make a funding stack, if you like, for some of our projects. Has that changed, you think?
I think that's certainly changed over the last funding triennium with IFF, IAF and HIF. As for the continuation of those funding streams through to the next triennium, I'm not sure, but there's some good threads of information in the GPS for which we're drafting a response on behalf of the Exec and Commission, which will be with you soon, that the Minister has proposed an expedited business case process, that too much cost is spent in business case, but it's the opportunity and time costs that we most suffer from, and that we lose an element of urgency to take opportunities when they're in front of us. And for much of New Zealand, that may not have much of a significant impact, but with the rate and the significance of growth and investment in Tauranga, whether it's in the urban growth areas on the fringe or it's in the city core and intensification of housing, that's really, really significant for us. So we'll be submitting hard on that.
If I may, on that though as well, Chair, those comments were including comments on their operational costs from TCC, the OPEX, which we didn't pursue well enough in the past. So that's something that we've changed our internal processes to get a better drawdown from Waka Kotahi to the greatest extent that we can. So we certainly have improved that.
It's worth noting also that Minister Brown, when he visited last week, and I know that you were all there as well, did note in his speech that he understands that the timeline of the GPS release and the delay incurred through to the RLTP process. Some councils' LTP process, noting they're not as far ahead as we are, does incur a burden upon local authorities, and that the current government is looking to expedite the process as a whole, whether that's extending the land transport period from current 3 years out to potentially 10, to give certainty to market and to local government. So our submission will be including support to that as well.
He did indicate that he expected the legislation for that to be in the House in this term, but he didn't expect it to be passed in this term. That would make a hang of a difference.
It was great to hear him acknowledge the degree of flux and uncertainty that it imposes upon us.
The park and ride trial from Tara Road, which is on this big sheet, Nick, really tempted to run our own blimmin' bus service and get it up and running. It's so frustrating. The only reason we're going through a business case is because the regional council couldn't reprioritise some funding and need NZTA funding. I mean, you almost want to get a couple of little minivans and run it yourself. It would be a shame to lose that out of the program. Okay, all right, so it's moved by Bill. Have we got a seconder? Stephen, thank you. That's receiving the report, approving up to $4 million of local shared funding budgeted to progress the 4 identified priority projects, providing this amount is offset elsewhere within the capital program, and that delegation be given to the General Manager of Infrastructure to manage that capital budget process. And that will take us through until end of August, when we know what the GPS is, and then the incoming council will have the opportunity to reprioritise based on the new GPS. Well, it'll be the new RTL, what do you call it?
NLTP.
Regional National Land Transport Plan, NLTP.
As different components between now and then are firmed up, so the GPS is finalised, the RLTP is agreed, the degree of risk diminishes, and as noted in the report, we'll be back to update along the same line of effort as that goes. So yourselves and incoming council are fully aware about where we sit with that degree of risk.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Right. Transport. So item 11.4, transport resolutions report number 50, very anonymously headed, number 50, but it's making a number of changes to parking and traffic restrictions. Moved by Shad, seconded by Bill. Any discussion on those? That's the heavy motor vehicles one in Manganui Road. That finalises that, formalises that, which will be a great relief to residents. Anything further on that? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. 11.5. This is a single source of data. It's always a worry.
I did notice that I think it was the Public Transport Committee meeting, they actually had them plugged in. Yeah, which would be probably a good idea. They had the microphones plugged in.
Well, that would be a help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't realise they had plugs. Yeah.
And
Well,
they
there we
had
are.
the leads, so, yeah.
Okay. So 11.5, which is the revocation of the speed limit bylaw. Did someone move that?
Yes,
No,
moved
Bill,
and seconded.
Bill and Stephen. On shared. Okay. All those in favour say aye. Against carried. Sorry, I was drinking my coffee. So that brings us to the parking management plan update.
We can swap to something a bit more light-hearted, shall we?
Thanks, Reece.
I'm happy to treat this one as read and just answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you very much. Look, I think it's a very sensible, pragmatic report, and appreciate the work that you've done in it. The only question I have is that we haven't in Mount Maunganui, so I think you're right. I mean, even though we didn't talk about putting parking meters in, everyone assumed when we were talking parking that that's what we were going to do. But actually quite strongly, I think the business sector through the LTP and I remember when we were at the market, the big little market at the Mount too, I did get quite a lot of feedback about parking. There was more a call for enforcement to make sure that the parking times were being managed, so you get that turnover. But you haven't defined the area in the report that you're going to be surveying over the next 12 months to report back to the new council on.
Yeah, I didn't draw out the full line because it's the areas currently covered by time limits that are there. There are some, a lot of people might not be aware in practice, but there are some pretty clear areas marked out with the time limit. You can roughly get an idea of that area in that small survey data map that I've got, but obviously the hard lines aren't there. So it would be wherever there are pre-existing time limits currently.
And do you think there's sufficient, you think there's sufficient signage there to make people, I know they're not looking at it obviously by the number of infringements, but often people say, well, I didn't see the signs. Do you think we need to have more than enough signs if we're going to start enforcing it?
Yeah, so our regulatory team has been really helpful in doing that survey. We've been able to earmark a few areas where some new signs can go in, so they'll be going in before we sort of, really go ham with the time limits as well.
Okay, that sounds very sensible. And it was something that the Tauranga, the Mount Business Association asked for too, to keep that turnover going.
Yeah, no, the community out there's been really good actually. One benefit of the start of consultation is I've been regularly in touch with some of the business owners and people out there, and that is a pretty clear call that we get quite a bit is the time limits are there. So
okay. Cool.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to make a comment in terms of paragraph 23, that by the end of this calendar year, we'll have about another 360 car parks in the city centre. So that's quite a significant increase. I suppose the question to you, Gareth, will those then two parking areas go up on the screens that it shows the available parking in the city centre? Because they are a wonderful mine of information of where things are at.
yes,
Good, thank you. And Rhys, in terms of your para 42, and you talk about the aggregate resource cost and a grand total of just under 18 million. So is that the value that's ascribed to those car parks throughout the city centre?
Yeah, correct, bang on. And that's a mix of both the maintenance costs of them existing and all the additional, like sort of the opportunity cost, and you can't use that land for anything else as well.
Just putting the opportunity cost except to one side, what is that aggregated maintenance cost on an annual basis for that area?
It's quite a bit. So I've been doing some looking into that. And if you look at it just for households, the onus on them for parking for Mount Maunganui is one that I looked at, because the city centre has paid parking now, so that's less, is $345 per annum approximately per household. So about $9.40 a day people are paying for free parking in Mount Maunganui at the moment.
Chair, I think that's important to understand that, because it's not a free lunch, and that at the end of the day, the general ratepayer ends up paying for that. So it was just really making that point.
I mean, it's a really, they're two really good tables, but it would be good to have that maintenance cost in, because people, I know when we had it last time and I had a call from someone checking that it was actually the land value, and that's fair enough, because we've just bought a piece of land in the centre city and turning that into car parks. So there is a cost, but the actual maintenance of on-street parking and all of that, that's a cost to the general ratepayer. So to have another column in there that showed the maintenance costs would be helpful, just to reinforce that there is no such thing as free parking. It is a cost, and it starts getting quite expensive when you look at the cost of Mount Maunganui, for instance. That's a lot.
Clarity, maintenance include enforcement?
No, it doesn't. So, and
that's another cost that would need to be recognised.
Yeah, and one thing that we are hoping for is with some of the early marks and some of the references to enforcement in the GPS, is that perhaps Waka Kotahi or NZTA now might relook at those enforcement fines, because we've got a bit of a lot of people prefer to pay for their parking through the fines at the moment than they do up front. In some cities, it's cheaper to pay by fine than the actual parking costs. So we're hoping for some updates there to sort of even it out too.
And Mayor Wayne Brown, who's calling for councils to be able to decide themselves, be trusted to decide themselves on how much they would charge. Happy to move?
Report, Chair, and just acknowledge, Rhys, great report, really informative too.
Yep. So Bill moved and Stephen second. And I repeat, I still think with that extension of the city centre, we do have to think about workers. We've just been talking about bus services beforehand. If anything, I think the GPS and the reduction in subsidy is going to make it more expensive, which means patronage might take a bit of a dive. So we do need to think about where workers on average to mid-range people are parking that work in the centre city, and make sure that we're not charging them out of the ability to come into work.
And we're expecting a fair increase in office workers turning up in the city centre. Obviously, our friends this morning outlined some of that too, so that'll increase that pressure on the city fringe.
All the more reason why we need some park and rides and bus stops. Okay. I'll put that then. There's no further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Rhys. Waiari Kaitiaki Advisory Group reps, shared, moving that. Thank you, that's a replacement. Yep. Any discussion? No, all those in favour say aye. Against carried. Thank you. That brings us to development contribution charges. Ben?
Morning, everybody. Quite a short report. So you remember we came to you in early this month with the long-term plan deliberations. The changes coming through in this draft are just to reflect some of the decisions made at that time, primarily really around the Te Papa changes, the biggest one we're seeing. A little bit up, a little bit down within the whole catchment, but otherwise I'll take the report as read and happy to take any questions.
Questions for Ben? No, I didn't. The only comments I think is that we've constantly got to be watching our costs because it is easy to pass the costs on. So we've just got to be watching.
Just following on from that, Chair, and I think, and that's why, and we've discussed it previously, and I think we certainly over the period that we've been in place, isn't that continual challenge of actually getting those costs right at the beginning of the process. And I know there are challenges in that, but the more that goes into that process at the front end, the better from my perspective. So
All right, so someone prepared to move? Shared, and Stephen second. I think it's the most reasonable that we can do under the circumstances. It makes sense, north and south Te Papa. Okay, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Executive report. This is a good report.
Yeah, I'd suggest infrastructure is having enough attention today. The only thing I would like to point out, though, is the success of the Water Watchers program. We've obviously had a much improved summer from the last couple of years with some consistent supply. So, but I think the graphs speak for themselves for the effect it's having. So, the team should be well proud of that.
So I thought, I mean, they've done a great job with their carbon reduction, and we had quite a lengthy submission from the Climate Reduction Advisory Group. I thought it might be worthwhile actually corresponding with them on the water team's results. I'm sure they would welcome those. For an incoming council, I still have to stop and think what a CCM is. I just think, you know, some of these abbreviations, you're starting with a whole lot of new people. It would be helpful to run an eye over the abbreviations. And I have no idea what a smart water plan, who needs it? I thought it must be swimming pools, and then I realised there's more than 126 swimming pools in the city. So, you know, explaining some of that stuff. What is a smart?
Yeah, I want a clarification on what is a smart water plan and what does that do? Is it an incentive of some kind to improve your water performance?
Yeah, Oh yeah, yeah. So the smart water plan is the process we have for high use, so not just industry, but also for pool owners and people that use a lot of water to work with us on how to reduce their volume, basically.
Haven't quite left infrastructure yet, Nick. In terms of transport, and this is the discussion around the Totara Street concrete pavement. So you note it will last around 40 years. A traditional asphalt, you probably replace it 3 times. So what does that then equate to in terms of the cost? So 3 times asphalt replacement, does that equate to what it costs for one lot of concrete pavement that lasts for 40 years? I just wanted to get a bit of a sense of that.
Yeah, so I actually can't tell you the numbers from the top of my head, but these are just from in terms of the value proposition that we come to. But it's actually not to say that over the 40 years the concrete will be cheaper, because there is a value in the road closures and the disruption and all of that as well. So it may actually be that we do pay, but only a small premium for the better product, but you don't have the disruption over time. So we take that into consideration as well.
And just a final comment on that. There was somewhere, there was a mention about putting bitumen over the concrete, where it's, and I think it was in some other location, might have been Tauranga or the lakes.
Links there is the one
right,
where,
yes.
where we're doing that. And that is, of course, an opportunity where noise, for instance, is an issue and you want a better ride qualities, which is on Totara Street isn't that essential. And also the asphalt might not have held up as well as the concrete in that location, but on locations like Links Ave, you get the look and feel of the black tar seal and much less noise as well.
My understanding was that the concrete in Tauranga went down essentially 10 days, was it 10 days, as against a normal dig up, and which could be several months.
Yeah, it was quicker than that. I think it was four in each direction, 3.5, about 3.5 on the northbound lane. So much quicker.
It was I really pleased to. I think the Sustainability and Waste doing that cruise boat waste reduction project. I mean, the reality is that most cruise liners these days do not allow people to take anything back on board. So you have to dump everything. If you've bought water bottles, food, alcohol, anything, you've got to dump that before you go back, and they're quite rigid in checking. And so that's quite a good study to see, because people were just dropping their water bottles and things, and the rubbish bins were overflowing. And I understand the port was saying, well, it's nothing to do with us, and the cruise ships are saying, well, it's nothing to do with us. But actually, there is a cost to us to manage that rubbish that their people. So it was good to see.
We do actually. We did collate the data from what we collected from that as well, actually. So we can provide you with that, and it's pretty impressive. Not in terms of weight, because the plastic bottles aren't very heavy, but the volume is considerable.
Yeah. All of which we have to cart away. Stephen.
Thank you. I really just wanted to call out that carbon reduction statistics which you've mentioned, but I do think it's worthy of some media attention, because this is a pretty good story. 28% reduction in city waters carbon emissions and a 33% reduction in overall emissions from 2019 to 2023. And indeed that it has been certified, independently certified as well. So, I think it's a clear demonstration that the city is doing its bit in this mission to reduce carbon emissions, and to have that independently substantiated, I think, is proof of that. So good news and commendation to the staff for the initiatives.
Okay, nothing more. Community services. Who's doing that? Look at that. You got your mic on? Green.
Good afternoon. Good morning. This is my first time sitting in this chair, so just here to represent Barbara and open to any feedback or questions.
It was just a comment, Chair, and relating to para 16 in terms of the purchase of the Waddell collection in terms of the surfboards and beach culture items. And I think it really actually sends a really good signal, because often at some of that beach culture, the significance of the Mount area is overlooked. So I'm delighted that the council and through the museum has actually purchased that, and look forward to the displays in the future on that. But yeah, I think it really actually sends a good message also about the role of museums and what they're there for, and it's across the whole range of aspects in the community. So right through to the contemporary. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you for that reminder. Yes, so just coming to paragraph 23, and certainly the acknowledgement in terms of the city is one of only 4 of the New Zealand cities that have that recognition in terms of as a tree city. It would have been helpful just to tease out the what was key in terms of the city getting that recognition, and given we're in a very select group of those in the nation, so acknowledging that, but also as part of, and there was some work that as a result of, I think, our LTPA or last year in terms of understanding the tree canopy in the city, and that is coming back to us at some point.
Yes, so we were lucky to have an intern working for us over the summer period. So we've been able to establish what our base is for the canopy cover, and we'll be able to bring forward what our plan is moving forward to increase that.
IAP is the acronym you're looking for, the Investment and Action Plan.
Well done.
So we've established we're 20% canopy, and we're heading for 30 is the target, 30%. Yeah.
I just want to make some comments about the events team. I went to the closing ceremony for beach volleyball, for the Futures Beach Volleyball Tournament last weekend, and got talking to the organisers, New Zealand Beach Volleyball, and they're really appreciative of the support I've got from our council staff in particular. Are really helpful, really supportive of the beach volleyball tournament. This is the second year they've run it, and I suppose in some ways are Mount Maunganui wanting to be the place for volleyball in New Zealand, like the home for beach volleyball in New Zealand. But I just wanted to commend the team and the staff for the way they've engaged with them in particular. And then also talking to Bill earlier this morning, he mentioned the same about the surf lifesaving and the support that council staff have been providing to them. Great event over the weekend, hundreds and hundreds of people filling out the beach. But I also want to mention about the use of our local kapahaka teams particularly for those internationals, that groups that come, and I suppose in a way promote our city and showcase, culture, identity, and using local resources to do that. It's a great way to from an international perspective, to demonstrate not just a beautiful place, but also our culture and identity as well.
I want to call out the library staff. As a former Minister of Education, well aware of the evidence of the amount of learning that children lose over the Christmas holidays. And so the library actually augmenting what parents are doing by keeping up their reading and obviously having great success and you know, it's a really valuable function that the library, so well done to the staff and clearly doing it right across the city. And of course, to the education of those kids who do take part, it is a really critical component. So well done. Good report.
And thank you. I'll definitely be passing that on to the wider team and it's appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, Chief Financial Officer, who's Paul today?
None of us, but we'll do our best.
He does sometimes.
He does. The only thing really, we've got Air New Zealand coming to talk to us, haven't we? I mean, it is really disturbing to see our average loading of flights is at 90%. And that's the big complaint I get, second to the parking at the airport, although that is getting a bit better with the new car parks, but just that ability to get a seat on a flight at a time that suits you. We've just got to be higher on the list somehow.
I know we don't have Paul, but I just kind of wanted to also, I suppose, understand how the other regional airports, particularly those ones close to us, Hamilton and Rotorua, whether they're at similar capacity levels as well. That'd be useful.
I think from the mayoral forum, the mayor of Rotorua, Tanya Tapsell, was complaining about the same, but it would be good to see if we can get some figures from there. Yeah. Stephen.
And related to that, it's not only the inability to get flights. I find as a regular flyer that I can generally get a flight if I book months in advance. But it's also having an enormous impact on the cost of those flights. Obviously, the airlines are using the absence of space to be able to, or they're controlling that by their pricing mechanisms. So I'd be interested to understand the relative cost of travel by air into and out of Tauranga as compared with other cities. And certainly I'm thinking, the other main metro centres, it's a heck of a lot cheaper for me to fly from Christchurch to Auckland than it is to Tauranga. A heck of a lot cheaper, probably a third of the cost.
Head of Air New Zealand's visit, is that what you were going to suggest? Yeah, great minds think alike. Yes. We actually ask them to, when they come to provide us with some of that comparative data.
Yeah, and I think we'll get a briefing from Ray. Perhaps he can give us some raw numbers and then we can ask some questions in advance as well.
Else for Paul? Strategy, growth and governance.
An update in terms of the election process that we're obviously going to be holding. It's great to see with the central government election that the number of registered voters is up. So we're not spending a lot of effort or money on that. Our focus will be on letting people know there's an election because we're obviously out of cycle. So our community, while some will be very aware, some won't be, and encouraging people to vote, including making greater opportunity for people to vote by putting bins in supermarkets, etc. So we're working on getting all of that ready, so that's ready to move ahead when the election timeframe starts. It's probably the key thing. And in terms of the Takawanga unit, the Te Rangapu has identified its priorities for the coming year. So that's something it does annually. They're outlined in paragraph 58.
I think it's a bit of a pity that, in a way, and we will struggle with it, that local government voting is postal voting. I see New Zealand Post is now proposing to get rid of all their posties and deliver all the mail by courier. And you think that we're having a major local government elections next year, and the postal system is actually in disarray. And so perhaps we need to be making representations to the Minister for Local Government to urgently look at local government voting for next year. It's pretty close. From experience, I can tell you it's probably too close to do very much about it. But this time next year, or October next year, there could be no posties. And we know from the last local government elections that a number of people didn't get their voting papers delivered on time, and then if they posted them back, their vote wasn't counted because it didn't arrive on time. So actually local government voting is relying on an archaic, chaotic process, which isn't secure. Reasons for not proceeding with online voting was that it wasn't secure enough. Well, the postal voting, it has to be even more insecure. And getting worse by the day. So maybe that's something we can take up with the Minister.
I did have a chat to to a New Zealand Post board member who lives here locally, whom we know. But he talked about, in terms of the reduction in volumes, they're having to rethink about where they prioritise and where they focus. And it's not on, when was the last time you received a letter in the mail? Apart from getting, government mail, the reduction in volumes, they are rethinking about how they reprioritise. And it is away from, single envelope distribution. So I think, that links into, government needs to be thinking about how they, particularly from an election point of view, local government point of view, how they refocus that.
I think once a year I get my historic places card. Other than that, a couple of even bank statements now, you don't get them sent out. They're all online. So, yeah.
I think that AA is still.
The AA still send their card out by mail?
Automobile Association.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Okay. Anything else there? No. Corporate services.
Just a couple of call outs. Firstly, over the last 24 months, while the Commission and the Chief Executive have been in place, we've seen a 5% reduction in turnover of staff. So we saw in February 2022, the turnover was 17 out of 100. Now we're tracking around 12. The reason why that's so important is that the stability gives us a chance to focus on improving community experiences. It also improves morale as well, and that's quite a large number, let alone the savings and recruitment costs. So the other side of this report talks about how that manifests itself. For example, we're seeing in the engagement survey scores that we have another one coming out in the month of March. We're expecting very high turnout where staff talk about what they need to be more effective. We also see in the report more innovation coming through. So in the example there, the GIS team have managed to work out that if you're a developer or a property owner, they can, rather than handing a customer a two-dimensional view of what consents are around you, you can get a three-dimensional view to see visually how high buildings will be beside you, or mapping where the water might flow. So a lot of that is in part tied to people getting to know each other and coming up with new ideas.
Comment on there, was there?
Sure.
No, but it really is. I mean, part of the terms of reference for us was to demonstrate what good governance looks like, and good governance is stable, consistent decision making, and I think, in fairness, that's reflected in what, as 4 professionals, we've delivered. And it's showing in things like staff turnover and staff morale, and in the media impact scores. So it goes right through the community. And we attended a function there with the Minister last week, and at least 3 people commented to me, you know, you guys have done a great job. Thank you so much. We've been able to get on with doing our job in the city and without having to worry about what was happening down there in the council rooms. So, you know, that's what good governance does, both for an organisation and also for a city. So thank you for drawing that to our attention. What is the GIS team?
This is spatial mapping. So the G is for geographic, and they're taking physical things that we look at and they're putting it into a digital twin, if you will, or yeah.
It's impressive. It really is impressive. Maybe we need it down in Durham Street. Like rubbing salt into the wound, Nick. Okay, anything else on that? I mean, I just love whoever that guy was that drew the smiley face and painted that roundabout yellow. He deserves a medal. He definitely deserved a good Christmas present.
Yeah, just on that, because you can see it from the top of Maua. So it actually stands out quite well.
His name's Julian. He is part of the crew that does work for us. So it's not just a random person, but it was a random decision, of course.
A random decision.
But I think we all couldn't help smiling when we saw it. So that's why it's still there.
And just a bit of humour in people's lives, really. It's great. I understand he'd been thinking about doing it for a long time and thought, bugger it, I'll go for it. Okay, where are we up to? Regulatory and compliance.
Thank you. Just a couple of points to note. You'll see in the building services section, we note the impact of dealing with some of our consent backlogs and what that does to our timeliness. So those consents that we've been processing, we've received and processed within the last 3 months, we're achieving a 96% timeliness. But we've had a month that's really focused on that backlog, and that brings the average down quite significantly to 78% of decisions made within 20 working days. So it's something that the team, both resource and building consents teams, are working really hard to just clear that backlog as fast as they can. You'll see on page 127, we have got that new dwellings demand forecast against our CCCs and building consents that have been issued and how low that's been in the last 3 months. We spoke a little bit about this in the last executive report, but just a reminder that with the lag of building consents and then CCCs issued, over the next 12 months, we'll see a further drop in the actual number of new builds on the ground. And finally, just an apology on page 130. There was a bit of a glitch in the system. It looks like some text is missing. So there should have been a full stop. There should have been a new paragraph. And we had just had some discussion around our parking and bylaws patterns that we're seeing at the moment. A lot of new, I guess a higher number of requests for service or complaints. And by complaints, I mean someone seeing a car parked in the wrong place and ringing us up for help. So it's not someone complaining about their parking tickets, but a real rise in number of those. So they continue to increase year on year. And also, interestingly, over at the end of this summer month, we've seen a rise in the number of freedom camping infringements we've had to issue, despite the infringement doubling this year. So apologies that text was missing from the report.
Difficult to reconcile. Yes. Dogs being underweight in bus lanes, parking and freedom camping, but I assume that something had gone wrong there.
A glitch in the system.
Yeah. A couple of things. I mean, it is really, we are falling way behind with our new builds, and I know I've got to write to the minister this year, but it would be interesting to get, I suppose, when that comes to, because we were 5,500 houses short, we must be falling further and further behind with our housing shortage. and we're nowhere near where we should be. I don't know what we can do to cope with that. But I did want to congratulate our dog team. With that amount of registrations, dog registrations, they are really putting in the hard yards to get those dogs registered. That's great because the number of dogs in the city is growing probably faster than the number of people. And they're doing.
Thank you. They'll appreciate that because it's been all hands on deck through that registration period just to make sure they can contact every new dog owner in the city.
Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to underline your comments around the number of new homes both being consented and completed. We should be doing 93 a month, and we're currently sitting at 29 consented and 20 completed. That, as you say, is a long, long way behind where we need to be. And of course, the implication of that is continued house price increases. So it is an issue, and I think it's very fortunate that the government is very focused on this issue, but it's going to take both central government, local government and the private sector working very closely together to try and turn those numbers around. Otherwise, we are going to be the most unaffordable city. We already are, and it's going to get worse at the current rate. So I think it's a call to action on all of us.
I just wanted to highlight, I was pleased with Sarah in terms of paragraph 82, just in terms of those two major events, and also how well, from the licensing inspector's perspective, they were managed from an alcohol management perspective. So given the size of them, and in the middle of summer, I think it was just worthwhile noting that responsibility of those involved. And there was, I was just in terms of paragraph 112, the new service in terms of engineering concept consultation. So pleased to see that, because often things can go through a resource and building consent, and they might go through that, and then there are issues then in terms of giving effect to that. So yeah, delighted to see that.
Thank you. We definitely see that conversations happen at the wrong time in the consent process.
Yes.
And by having those conversations amongst teams and builders or developers early on is the best place to have them.
I just wanted to note, I suppose, that our process for key account management and what we're doing there. I think in terms of the number of project customers and clients we've kind of got on the go, it's a huge list, and seeing the demand for it, I think, is really good for the use of that. I assume para 109, where it talks about Karaka Pines Retirement Village, this is the Waitaha development proposal. They came to the LTP and were concerned about, I think, about the delays in terms of infrastructure provision, and I think we responded to that to say there should be capacity there, and that's been limitedly notified to Ngā Pōtiki, because I think that was a split property through treaty settlement. So that'll be just worked through, hopefully, between them and try and get a resolution there.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, city development and partnerships.
Te maere koutou. Just three quick things. Wide variety of construction updates in there. Particularly pleasing finishing the piling at the new Library Community Hub site a couple of weeks early. So that is all done. Piling rigs off site for a month and then back to start doing test piling on the CWM site. So that's good. It gets mentioned in here, but it happened after the period was Children's Day in the city centre. So an event delivered by the events team, but supported by the city centre team. And it was just wonderful to see so many people in the city centre on a wet day. Weren't deterred in any way, shape or form. Lots of kids in gumboots and raincoats with umbrellas jumping around, and we opened up the Willow Street to Manawataki site for kids and families to come in and jump on a digger or a crane. And it was cool to share the story of what we're trying to do there with them, but to see so many families engaged with the project. So that was excellent. And just again, continued and very positive feedback about the city safety and engagement advisor role. So Paul's role, other people starting to tell our stories now. So city centre businesses reaching out to the newspapers, and did an interview I did an interview this morning with Radio New Zealand and Garth from the Chemist talking about the impact of that role. Paul Mason's presenting to the Police Commissioners Forum tomorrow. It's attracting attention all around the country in terms of the decision we made to put someone on the ground building those relationships with city centre businesses in the safety and security space. So more positive feedback, which is great to hear. Happy to answer any questions.
I think the minister, the police minister will be here because he's also coming to the Bay of Plenty emergency, what do they call it? Emergency Management Committee. But I've suggested to him that he might like to also have a look at that work that's Paul's doing in association with the police, because it's a really good model, really good model. The only question I had was the waterfront playground. Says we were waiting on the costs of that cost estimate to come through before we release the plans. That I see from here that the cost estimate would have been completed by now, but I haven't seen anything about releasing the plans. Does that mean it's come in over budget and they've gone back to value engineer? Call me suspicious.
I think your suspicions are probably right, but let me find out and come back to you.
Anything for Gareth? Shane.
I just want to note, I came into town on Friday night and I saw another crane popped up out of the ground, which is great to see. So I'm seeing a skyline of cranes with the Craig's Investment Partners crane going up, which is great to see. But then also thinking about all the other developments in the pipeline and also hearing some of the potential this morning. So great to see that kind of development occurring. I was at the Good Neighbour 10-year celebration thing on Friday night, sitting next to a guy who I think is involved in development and investment, and he was quite interested in all the activities going on in and around the city. So you might get a phone call potentially in the next couple of weeks. So yeah.
Yeah, look, I think this report is great, and what it's demonstrating is the green shoots really of the city centre transformation and a number of the projects already underway, and you sense a change of the conversation. So it's less focus on the absence of car parks and more actually about what's happening in the city, and I think that's fantastic. When you look at the images of Tunks Reserve at night, along with all of the other stories about what's happening, there's an enormous amount happening, and yes, we're going to go through a lot of pain, I guess, with the construction, but boy, when you start to see the results of that work, as we can see in these images, it's certainly going to be worth it. I'm also really pleased to see lots of signs around the city showing what is coming. From my perspective, I reckon the bigger the picture, the better. But it's great to see those. It's on billboards around so that people can get a sense of what's coming and excite their imagination. So good progress.
Just we had a meeting on Friday, the Blue Maui building down on Dive Crescent. So we're going to use that for advertising the It's On campaign coming into the city centre. So it's pretty big. Watch this space.
Right, okay, so someone like to move that we receive the report. Shad moved and Bill seconded. Thank you very much. It's good to have the pictures because we don't always get out and about. I think I came to a meeting in the Tunks, the lights were on the Tunks Reserve, and I mean it just makes such a difference. There's always someone there, and especially at lunchtime it's packed. So really good to see that part of the city being used because it's now safe, it's well lit, and it provides access down to the water. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Now, I know we're over our time for our 2 hours stop and stand up. What I suggest we do is that we've got a very small public excluded. So let's move into public excluded, stand up and shake it all about and sit down again, finish it. And then we're right, rather than have a 10-minute break. All right. So would someone like to move that we go into public excluded for the reasons outlined in the agenda? Bill's moved, Stephen seconded. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, have a stand.